Hello students, Mr. Yan here. Welcome to Chapter 5, Lesson 1. We're calling it No Taxation Without Representation. Let's get started. There we go. No lie, students. Things are going to get pretty rowdy pretty quick here in the colonies. The book doesn't really go into a lot of details, but people, once riled up, can do some pretty mean things. In this chapter, we learn that pretty much every time Britain tries to pass some taxes to deal with the massive debt they accrued as a result of the French and Indian War, the colonists pretty much go mad dog crazy. One practice was to tar and feather tax collectors. If you were a tax collector and you heard that an angry mob grabbed your coworker, poured hot tar on them, and then threw feathers all over his tarred, naked, and burned body, then paraded him around town for all to see, you would probably think about staying home too. We have that. We've got people burning effigies of the king. So basically think about making a scarecrow that looks like somebody you don't like, and then hanging it and burning it and parading it around town. Things like that. People getting shot in the streets. Absolute madness. So the colonies were a powder keg. One that's going to go off and spark the American Revolution. Let's talk about some of those details. So as you may well remember from the last chapter, the relationship between the colonists and their motherland of Britain is already becoming a little strained. Colonists were none too happy about the proclamation of 1763, which prohibited them from expanding too far west. You can see it right here. There was also some smuggling issues going on. We'll remember that the colonies were only supposed to trade with Britain. That's it. Get all their goods from Britain, send all their goods to Britain. So you've got that, and you also have this, coming issue that the plan for Britain is to pay off their debt by taxing the colonists. So things are going to get worse. The colonists are going to have none of that. On top of that, you have, more troops were sent to the colonies to enforce the already existing British law and taxes within the colonies. A new tool that tax officials are going to use to combat the smuggling issue is called a writ of assistance. This is my writ of assistance. It is a document that allows British officials in the colonies to basically serve as an instant warrant to look for goods that are being smuggled in either warehouses, boats, or any other kind of property. The colonists didn't like that because it meant that British officials could pretty much search wherever they wanted, whenever they wanted. So that was going to chafe the colonists. The Sugar Act was passed in 1764. This act actually lowered a tax on molasses from 6 cents to 3 cents. The hope was that the colonists would just pay the lower tax instead of, taking the risk of trying to smuggle goods. The problem was that the act also allowed custom officials to seize smuggled goods without going through the whole court process. So it was sort of another shortcut for British, officials, and the colonies took exception to that as they thought of themselves as British subjects and therefore had the right to a trial. So that was going to anger them as well. Even more taxes. In 1765, Parliament passed the Stamp Act. This was a tax on almost anything that was printed on paper. So that means newspapers, legal documents like marriage certificates, even playing cards. And when the tax was paid, the paper would receive a stamp showing that it was a legal, it was paid for and legal. People were furious. Colonial governments set up resolutions to Parliament saying that only the colonies had the right to tax the colonies. They were mad about not having representation in Parliament, which was sort of the lawmaking, assembly in Britain. They were mad that they didn't have representation in Parliament, and therefore they shouldn't be being taxed by Parliament. In Boston, a group of rabble-rousers called the Sons of Liberty, which was created by Sam Adams. This group coordinated and conducted what one might call street actions, like burning effigies, tarring and feathering of tax collectors, and organized protests. So the Sons of Liberty are this group set up to more or less cause trouble for the British as a result of their tax policies. Here's a picture of that stamp that would be stamped on the paper to show that the tax had been paid. There were calls on colonial merchants to boycott British goods. That's essentially when you refuse to buy a good so that it hurts the seller. The idea here would be that Britain would lose so much money from the boycott that they would repeal all their taxes. The colonists demanded a repeal of the Stamp Act, and the colonies actually got their way. In March of 1767, the Stamp Act does get repealed. In conjunction with this repeal, though, Parliament passed what they called the Declaratory Act, claiming they had the right to tax the colonies. So if I were to personify this, I would be a British guy, and I would say, all right, colonists, we're going to repeal the Stamp Act, but we want to let you know that it was totally legit, and we can do it, and we're allowed to pass taxes for the colonists. So that's basically what happened. The colonists, they were like, we don't care, whatever. Now, the Stamp Act had been repealed, but Britain still needed revenue from the colonies. They still needed to get some income from the colonies to pay off this massive debt. So they passed what was called the Townshend Acts in 1767. They thought that they could circumvent all these problems with taxes by taxing goods like glass, tea, and paper as soon as it arrived in the colonies instead of once it was dispersed in the colonies. So basically they were going to tax it at the docks, literally. They thought wrong. The colonists went crazy again. There were calls for more boycotts. Women's groups like the Daughters of Liberty, Sons of Liberty, Daughters of Liberty, they would do things like homespin clothes, make clothes in the colonies so that folks didn't have to buy their clothing from Britain, which was a major industry there. Things like that. Basically, any way they could think to hurt Britain, they would try it. It was just another organized effort to hurt Britain enough into repealing taxes. If you want to learn more about the Sons of Liberty, check out this link. I'm actually going to put another link down there if you'd like to learn more about the Daughters of Liberty. That's going to be something cool to learn about too. If you want to learn a little more about those groups, on the very next page you have your quiz, basic 10-point Yund quiz. If you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, have a great day, and you can expect things here in the colonies to get much worse before they get better. All right, I'll see you next time.